Hi, Todd down here on September 23rd, 2019. It's about 1 p.m. and I'm here today aboard my 1936 wooden powerboat Tortuga to begin preparation for haul out. Yes, that's right, the end of the season is just about upon us here on the coast of Maine, and indeed Tortuga is scheduled to come out on the 26th, 3 days from now, at 8:30 in the morning. So I have some things to do before we haul out. Normally what I do is winterize the water system and the head, and I also change the oil in the engine. And after haul out, we run the engine very briefly to winterize the engine's raw water cooling system. So today what I plan to do is change the oil in Tortuga's Volvo-Penta D240 diesel engine. And I'll also be changing the oil filter. So it's a fairly straightforward procedure. I always do this myself because it takes less than half an hour altogether to do the entire project, and if I hired the yard to do it, it would cost me several $100s based on previous experience. So let's get going and change the oil in Tortuga's diesel engine. The first step in changing the oil is obviously to get access to the engine. Tortuga's engine is down underneath the cabin sole here in the upper cabin. Just lift that up, and there it is. And that's pretty much all I need to do to make my oil change, but I'm going to open up the back too, just to make it a little bit easier to access everything. I think I'll just move this back a little so that it's partly out of the way. This thing is kind of heavy. There we go. That's far enough back that it won't be an issue. And now I can get at everything I need to. So, before I get going, start changing the oil, I should point out one difference between changing the oil on a marine diesel and on a car or truck. And that is, I cannot get under the engine to drain the oil out. There's about 2 inches of clearance between the bottom of the boat and the bottom of the oil pan. And in fact, I can't even reach the oil pan drain. So normally on a diesel engine, you do one of two things. You can pull out the dipstick and put a very narrow tube down the dipstick tube all the way down to the bottom of the pan and pump the oil out either by hand or with an electric pump, or you can do what was done here on Tortuga, and that is Tortuga has her oil pan plug removed and a tube has been attached to the bottom of the oil pan that comes up onto the side of the engine. And what I'm going to do is use that tube to pump the oil out of the engine. So I'm going to set my pump up and we'll get ready to start working. Okay, now just about ready. This is my oil change pump. It's got a little reversible electric pump here, and basically it can pump oil out of the engine and into the bucket here, or it can pump oil from the bucket into the engine. And it just depends on which way you flip the switch here. So in order to pump the engine out, I'm going to reach down here and take the cap off the pump out tube that goes to the bottom of the oil pan. And this is always a little hard to do without dropping it in the bilge, which I do not want to do. Just a friction fit. There we go. Now I'm going to slide the end of this tube onto the pickup tube. Like that. And should go on there pretty easily. Just have to get it down here and fit it onto that tube. Okay, I think I've got it on there enough. Okay, the next step is to open up the oil fill so that I'm not just pulling against a sealed system. And now we'll pull out the dipstick, and I'm going to get a rag to wipe it off. Okay, so out comes the dipstick, and that just opens the system up so that I can pull through without pulling basically a vacuum. So now I'm going to hook the pump up to battery down here. And we're ready to pump some oil out. So here goes. This usually doesn't take too long. This will take a little longer than usual because I did not run the engine first so the oil's cold, but it's a 15W40 oil, so it's pretty thin and it will still pump out, and I just let this run a little longer until she's dry. So basically that's the main procedure. The only thing left to do after this is to get the oil filter off. It's right straight down under my hand, and it's in a pretty awkward position, but it can come out of there. So we'll let this pump for a minute until it finishes. Let that run for a minute or two. Cold oil is... There we go, I can hear it's changed pitch. We're starting to pull air. So, we're done. Now we'll just pull this tube off. I'm going to put down this oil absorbent rag underneath here so that I don't spill any oil into the bilge. Like that. Pull this tube off and lift it out. And I normally set it in there when I'm finished. Then we'll disconnect the pump from the electrical. And the oil is out of the engine. The next step now is to remove the oil filter. Now the oil filter on this engine is down pretty low here, and I really would like it if I had a remote oil filter, but I don't. But what I'm gonna, and it also goes in from the side, so it always leaks a little oil. So what I'm gonna do before I pull it out is put an oil absorbent rag underneath it. Now the filter is right down here. It's a really tight position, so what I'm gonna do is put a strap wrench on it and use that to take it out. So we'll get the strap wrench on here. It's a little tricky. Here we go. Now, to turn the strap wrench, I'm just going to put an adjustable wrench on it and turn it. Now this filter sometimes is really difficult to get off. Boy, this filter does not want to turn. Now I gotta get on the other side of the hose here. Try it this way. The difficulty here is part of the fuel system is right up against the oil filter. So that is tricky to get the strap wrench on. There we go. I'll try it again. Boy, she is not turning. Well, all I can say is that after much fighting, I finally got this oil filter out. It was tighter than I've ever had an oil filter, and I put it on there, and I only put them on hand tight. So I don't know why it was so tight, but boy, it was tight, and it did not want to come off. But finally, with the strap wrench and a socket wrench in it and a big cheater bar, I was able to get it to move, and once it moved the first 1/8 inch, it just unscrewed normally. But boy, it didn't want to move that first 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to wrap this up, and we will put the new filter on. Okay, at this point, I have put the first gallon of oil into the engine. This engine usually holds about 5 quarts. And unfortunately, I pushed the wrong button on my camera and it didn't record that. So now it's been about 5 minutes, so the oil's had plenty of time to drain down. So I'm going to check it and see how much oil we've got in here and how much we need to add. Okay, we're about, 1/8 of a quart down. And noting that the oil filter is not full of oil, I have to add at least that much. So what I've done to make this a little easier is I transferred some oil into the empty gallon because it's a lot easier to pour out of one of these jugs when it's not full. I've got an oil sorbent cloth around the top there to keep me from accidentally spilling oil. I'll put a little in. That should probably do it. And we'll let that drain down for a minute or two. And we'll check the oil again. So I'll put this guy in, see if it's coming up. I'd like it to be a little bit above full. Alright, it's almost at full now, so we'll let it drain down for another little bit. And that should leave it full. Now, check it one more time. See if it's still coming up. Pretty nearly full. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fire the engine up and let it run for a few minutes. In the worst case, it's down about a cup, because that's about all that filter holds. So we're gonna wipe off in here, make sure I haven't got any oil on the engine anywhere, and get it so it won't smell. And put the filler cap back on. Not quite as tight as it was before. There we go. And at this point, I'm going to fire the engine up and let it run for a couple minutes to circulate the oil around, fill up the oil filter, etc. Then we'll shut it down, let the system drain down, and check the oil again and see if we need to add any more. Okay, starting this engine is pretty simple. Basically, I have to open the seacock for the raw water. I always keep it closed, just a habit. And I'll turn on the engine start switch here. And we'll fire it up. I'm just going to let it run for a minute or two. Now this will beep twice when it's ready, and then we'll see how it goes. Okay, that's about a 4 or 5 minute engine run. So I'm just going to let that drain down for a minute or two, and then we'll check the oil and see if we need to add any now that the oil filter is full. Okay, let's take a look at it. Pull it out. We'll wipe it off. Put it back. And she is reading down about 1/3 of a quart. So I need to add a little bit more. So at this point, what I'll do is just add oil until it's full, and that'll be that. So we'll take the fill cap off and add a little more oil. Put this back up here just to prevent me from spilling. And we will pour, and get this out of the way a little bit more. A little more oil in. It should pretty much do it. Let that run down a little and give it a check. Yep, she's fine. So at this point, ready to put the cap back on and declare the oil changed. There we go. Dipstick is on. Oil filter, I'm just going to reach down here with an oil sorbent cloth and feel underneath it to make sure that I got it tight enough and it isn't leaking at all. And it appears to be fine. No oil leaking. Make sure this rubber cap down here on the drain tube is down. And she is, at this point, ready to go into winter storage. I'm only going to move the boat a little bit on Thursday, about a half mile, so it won't run long and the oil will still be quite clean. Okay, so my oil change is done, except for the filter that didn't want to come off. It was fairly routine, and altogether, largely because I had to really fight that filter, it took me about 45 minutes. Next year, hopefully the filter will be easier and I won't have to fight it so much to get it off. So everything at this point is ready to go for the winter. I am going to do one more thing before I put it to bed, and that is just check the transmission, which is no big deal. Anyway, hope you enjoyed seeing me fighting that filter and making my oil change. And if you did, give me a thumbs up. If you haven't, please subscribe to my channel to see more exciting boat maintenance stuff and other interesting videos from the coast of Maine. Thanks for watching.